Michelle Phillips solved a decade-long mystery. Nobody knew who the father of Mama Cass's child was, a secret she took to her grave. It was only years later that Phillips discovered his identity, and it was the biggest bombshell of all. As a member of the tumultuous 1960s folk group the Mamas and the Papas, Michelle Phillips was involved in some of the biggest feuds and breakdowns in rock history. In fact, despite her angelic face, she was at the very centre of the drama. Michelle Phillips hasn't lived an ordinary life, and it all began when she was still just a child. At the age of 5, her mother suffered a fatal brain aneurysm, and afterward her father raised Michelle and her sister in a Bohemian lifestyle. By Michelle's own account, her father Gil was an extremely positive presence in her life, teaching her discipline and care. However, throughout her childhood she watched as her father took woman after woman to his bedroom with almost compulsive frequency. This would end up having a profound effect on her, but not before she witnessed something even worse. When she was 13 years old, Michelle met Tamar Hodel, a much older Hollywood socialite whose father, Dr. George Hodel, was and remains the prime suspect in the infamous Black Dahlia murder. Despite this ignominious lineage and Tamar's own troubled life, Michelle admitted, "I took one look and said, 'New best friend.'" Soon, Tamar had the 8th grade Michelle supplied with a fake ID and a steady stream of uppers, and the pair waltzed around Hollywood, listening to all the music they could get their hands on. In 1961, when Michelle wasn't even 17, the two women moved to San Francisco and began the chapter that would change Michelle's life. Not long after arriving in San Francisco, Michelle encountered John Phillips, the leader of the buzzy folk band, the Journeymen. From the first moment she saw him, Michelle was already head over heels. The first snag Michelle hit in her quest for John was almost immediate. 25-year-old John not only had a wife, society ballerina Susan Adams, but also 2 children. Michelle had grown up in a permissive household, and even from her still tender age, she was very comfortable with her powers of attraction. So when she inevitably caught John's attention, she was uninterested in sneaking around. The bold teenager knocked on his wife Susan's door one afternoon and announced, "I'm in love with your husband." Michelle was nowhere near John's first affair, and Susan, battle-hardened and weary, only calmly invited her in, then told her that her husband had a girl in practically every port, and that willowy, flowered child Michelle was just the latest. John Phillips may have been a Lothario, but he fell just as hard for Michelle as she fell for him. He later wrote that it was as if she stepped out of a dream and into his life. The Casanova was cuffed. By 1962, John and Susan were divorced, and he and Michelle had moved to New York and gotten married. John Phillips was incredibly musically talented, but he was also, as one of his circle put it, akin to a charismatic snake oil salesman. Inconstant and opportunistic, he'd already chased trends like doo-wop and ballads to try to conquer the popular musical landscape. He was also extremely possessive, and insisted that Michelle stay in supervised dorms when he was away on tour. Michelle, sporting that angelic face, had won a teen modelling contract, but John had other ideas. To keep her in his sights, he insisted she turn the contract down, take singing lessons, and join his band. John always had his finger on the pulse, and quickly decided their folk band needed a rock angle to stay in the zeitgeist. However, he also drew from his ballad years when he wrote songs, which he frequently came up with on substance-addled walks around the city. One such night, he formed the lyrics, "All the leaves are brown and the sky is grey. I've been for a walk on a winter's day." Later that day, Michelle got a rude awakening as John shook her out of bed and begged her to help him finish the song. Thus, California Dreamin' was born, one of the most iconic songs of the 1960s. The iconic band came hot on its heels. Around this time, John met Denny Doherty, a tenor who looked like a fragile lute player. Then came the inimitable singer Cass Elliot. Together, the foursome became the Mamas and the Papas. But before they even got together, the cracks were starting to show. Unsurprisingly, John Phillips' obsession with controlling Michelle didn't let up as their marriage went on. But Michelle's reaction stunned him. Instead of submitting to his whims, Michelle began to rebel. During her tug-of-war with John, Michelle happened to meet her sister's new boyfriend, Russ Titleman. Despite their respective partners, the pair fell fast in love and started a full-blown affair. It was Michelle who two-timed the philandering John, not the other way around. Her husband didn't take this role reversal sitting down. He was so incensed he called Michelle's new beau and threatened, a different kind of guy would be waiting outside your door with a shotgun. This despite John's own numerous forays into infidelity. But the warning worked, and Titleman reluctantly broke up with Michelle. John was shocked to find that Michelle had zero remorse about her affair. After all, she'd grown up watching her own father with countless women, and she had no shame about her sexuality. In frustration, John wrote "Go Where You Wanna Go" about Michelle. The trouble was, it wasn't just John and Michelle anymore. They had a band to keep together, and that band was about to explode. In 1965, the Mamas and the Papas released California Dreamin' as a single, to instant, rabid success. Soon they were playing The Ed Sullivan Show, partying late into the night, and fighting like cats and dogs. Michelle's affair had caused enough trouble in the Phillips household, but her next choice of lover threatened the very future of her band. After long rehearsals full of mutual magnetism, Michelle finally struck up an affair with her other male bandmate, Denny Doherty. At first, John's reaction seemed to be his usual. He wrote a song, "I Saw Her Again," about his heartbreak. This time though, it didn't end there. Around this time, John and Michelle decided it was best to live apart, and John decided it was also best to get a new girlfriend, socialite Anne Marshall. Michelle soothed her ego by starting a secret tryst with the Byrds musician Gene Clark. It was all supposed to be hush-hush, but Gene Clark apparently didn't feel like hiding in the shadows. One night he showed up to a Mamas and Papas concert in a bright red shirt and sat in the front row. It was a loud and clear message, and Michelle, suddenly feeling bold, began to belt out songs right to Gene's face as John looked on. Michelle was triumphant, for now. John could barely take Michelle's affairs, and he was furious about this public embarrassment. After the show, he fired her from the band, and when Michelle looked to her bandmates for help, they backed up John. In the blink of an eye, she was out of the group she founded, but she wasn't going to go without a fight. Angelic looking as she was, Michelle was furious about her expulsion. This only got worse when the band took on Jill Gibson, the girlfriend of their producer Lou Adler, to replace her. Suddenly it was sinking in for Michelle that they really meant it. She retaliated by turning up at a Mamas and Papas recording session and screaming that she would bury them all. And when Denny Doherty refused to stand up for her, she tried to hit him. The Mamas and the Papas were nothing if not volatile, and despite Michelle's behaviour that day, they eventually took her back into the fold. For a brief moment after this reconciliation, everything looked as rosy as it had ever been for Michelle. The Mamas and the Papas were still defining the 60s with their music, playing the Monterey Pop Festival next to future icons like Jimi Hendrix and turning their song San Francisco into an anthem of the age of Aquarius. Michelle and John used their newfound money to buy a mansion in Bel Air, where they hosted lavish parties with rock gods and movie stars. Besides that, Michelle also discovered she was pregnant with what would be the couple's only child, daughter China Phillips. Yet, new house and new baby aside, this domestic bliss had a deep darkness. Throughout this time, John was still controlling Michelle, perhaps more than ever. Cass Elliott's sister recalled of the Bel Air mansion, "I didn't feel comfortable in that house. It was dark, and so was John's vibe." More than that, Tamar Hodel described how once when she went to visit Michelle there, John wouldn't let his wife come out. If they only knew what was really happening. To this day, Michelle remains tight-lipped about everything that was going on in that house, both before and after she gave birth to her daughter. The details she did reveal are chilling. Although there was apparently just one incident of John physically attacking Michelle, she admitted that it led to her being hospitalised. It was eventually all too much for her to take. By 1968, Michelle and John's daughter China was just a newborn, but the horror story of her life at home was only getting worse. It brought Michelle to a gut-wrenching decision. She had to divorce John. By this time, John Phillips was deep into serious substance use, and though the Mamas and the Papas were no strangers to this kind of partying, John had always been the most self-destructive in his behaviours. Without Michelle watching on, he fell apart. Though he quickly rebounded with a new girlfriend, actress Genevieve Waite, the pair spent most of their early time trying to snag the intense drugstore narcotic Dilaudid. Apparently, the father of Michelle's child was so out of control that no less than rocker Keith Richards once asked him to leave his party. But Michelle was having troubles of her own. The same year John and Michelle divorced, the fate of the Mamas and the Papas was also all but sealed. With Cass Elliott wanting to pursue a solo career and new trends leaving the group in the dust, the band petered out before officially getting released from their record contract in 1969. John and Michelle were no more, and so was their band. After the end of her music career and her marriage, Michelle rebounded with actors and acting. She briefly dated an up-and-coming Jack Nicholson as she auditioned for various roles. Soon enough, she nabbed the female lead in The Last Movie, which was counter-cultural hero Dennis Hopper's follow-up to the iconic Easy Rider. When Michelle signed on, she must have been aware of Hopper's notorious reputation for very hard partying and erratic behaviour. The trouble was, she didn't see these as warning signs, she saw them as lures. For Michelle, used to John Phillips' own brand of volatile rock god, Dennis Hopper was catnip. The production of The Last Movie in Peru was infamously rowdy and substance-addled, and once more Hopper was at the centre of the chaos. Michelle, meanwhile, fell madly in love with the director-actor, mostly out of, as she puts it, a Florence Nightingale instinct to save him. But in trying to save him, she nearly doomed herself. Shortly after meeting Hopper, Michelle made a bad decision. The pair felt that marrying was the best way to declare their love, and they tied the knot right after production on The Last Movie wrapped in late 1970. Those present at the Bohemian wedding described candles stuck in paper bags as decoration, and the fact that Hopper bizarrely read the whole wedding ceremony himself from the Gospel of St. Thomas. Then again, it was the morning after that really told the grim tale. Hopper was unsurprisingly extremely not sober on the day of their nuptials, and according to one report, the actor had been so out of it that when he woke up the next day in his bed, he didn't recognise his bride. A friend also reported that the groom, who was an avid gunman, scared both Michelle and her daughter by shooting guns inside the house shortly after the wedding. According to another report from a friend, Hopper, again likely on something, tried to handcuff and restrain Michelle during this time because he claimed she was a witch. She knew she had to get out, but it took a push to do it.
Make sure everybody knows about it.
In the end, for all the interminable torment she faced with him, Michelle's marriage to Hopper lasted only 8 days. It was Michelle's father who struck the final blow. She described how her father dragged her into his attorney's office and said, "Men like that never change. File for divorce now." She listened, and her love life was never quite the same. After surviving both John and Hopper, Michelle would never again submit herself to a man like them. In fact, she emerged out of these unions as the aloof it girl on the Hollywood scene. She rekindled a romance with Jack Nicholson for a year, then left him and quickly struck up a relationship with the infamous rake Warren Beatty. Even so, a dark cloud was about to come into Michelle's footloose and fanciful world. Michelle always maintained a relationship with her old bandmate Cass Elliot. The pair shared almost everything, and often set up their respective young children as playmates, with Michelle's daughter China being just a year younger than Cass's own daughter Owen. But there was one thing missing. No one, not even Michelle, knew who Owen's father was. In the summer of 1974, as they were lying by a pool together, she mustered up the courage to ask Cass about the girl's paternity, even though Elliot had kept tight-lipped for years. Laughing, Elliot waved Michelle off and said, "I'll tell you when I get back from London," where she was due to perform solo. Except, Elliot never came back. Cass Elliot had been feeling ill for weeks before her London shows, but she still managed to knock the performances out of the park. She even called Michelle afterward on the phone, crying from happiness at how well they went over. The next evening after that phone call, 32-year-old Cass Elliot was dead. Despite all the rumours to the contrary, the singer died of a heart attack, with no substances in her system, in her hotel bedroom. Yet no matter the manner of her death, Michelle must have been stunned when she heard the news. Cass Elliot left a void in Michelle's heart that she would spend the next decades trying to fill. Over the years, Michelle took on other long-term partners, had one more child, and adopted another. Yet, perhaps more than even her own family, she began to look after the families of others. As Cass Elliot's daughter Owen once put it, she became everyone's Mama Michelle. By the mid-80s, Owen was becoming curious about her infamously mysterious parentage and asked Michelle for help finding her long-lost father. This was how Michelle solved a decade-long mystery. Michelle called in every musical connection she knew to find the man's name. Soon enough, Cass Elliot's old lover contacted Michelle, who revealed the truth to him. Although the man's identity was known only among inner circles for years, after his death in 2008, it was finally made public that he was guitarist Chuck Day, who played with the Mamas and the Papas on tracks like California Dreamin'. Throughout her long career in entertainment, Michelle Phillips continues to excel in various mediums. For years, she picked up various singing performances, and even had a much-loved run on the popular late 80s show Knots Landing, as scheming mother Ann Matheson Sumner. As of 2024, Phillips is 80 years old and showing little sign of slowing down. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more videos.